Many thanks for staying with us on this special broadcast as we celebrate Zimbabwe at 42. Now, on the first half, we dealt with politics and government, how Zimbabwe as a country has struggled to emancipate from white minority domination from 1980, 1965, and even right now as we have the President Emerson Mnangagwa. We also had Robert Mugabe, who ruled for so many years. And unfortunately, according to a lot of people, did not relive the dreams that Zimbabweans actually hoped for. And right now, we have joining us on the program to discuss the situation of economy we have with us Pilot Dube, is a finance and economics advisor, Democratic Party Zimbabwe in Toronto, Canada. We also have Prosper Chitambara, a development economist. Thank you so much for joining us on this special broadcast celebrating Zimbabwe at 42.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so we'll hold on that thought because I'm sure you have a lot of things to talk about, especially on this jewel of Africa, Zimbabwe. We'll go for a quick break and we'll look at the economy of Zimbabwe.
When Zimbabwe gained independence in 1980, Robert Mugabe's administration took careful steps to change the management system that it had inherited from the previous white minority leaders. The first budget, presented in July 1980, was defined as conservative, with a modest and pragmatic application of socialism by the finance minister. The white minority, on the other hand, had passed on government apparatus that comprised various economic levers, while the white minority had devised a system of government involvement to foster newborn industries and preserve agricultural prices through marketing boards that were by instinct married to a system of private industry. In the 1990s, Zimbabwe's economy began to deteriorate, and in the early 2000s, it became even worse. The Mugabe's administration's controversial land reform program, which aimed to hasten the slow reallocation of farmland from the white minority to black Zimbabweans, began in the 1990s, picked up steam after 2002, and it is one of the most frequently cited causes of economic decline. But other factors also played a role.
We want full and unfettered democracy. Down with the racist constitution, down with the dirty elections, pamberi nechimrenga.
Mugabe's contentious decision to join in the civil conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo in 1998 cost the Zimbabwean economy hundreds of millions of dollars and resulted in the suspension of foreign economic help. Later, in response to the land reform program and breaches of human and political rights, aid and loans to the nation were denied. The worsening economic situation was compounded by economic mismanagement, soaring inflation, and record-high unemployment rate. 2017 marked a turnaround with the removal of Robert Mugabe as the president in a coup. The current leader, Emerson Mnangagwa, promised a break from Mugabe's authoritarian rule and economic mismanagement, declaring a new Zimbabwe that is open for business. But the economic woes, including the foreign currency crunch that plagued Mugabe's rule, remain, and the promise of new jobs is still a pipe dream for many. While some goods that were once either scarce or inaccessible are now readily available, most of the population cannot afford basic necessities. Sanctions, mismanagement, and corruption are blamed, but sanctions are generally noted as the main drawback of this southern African nation. Unarguably, Zimbabwe is a land of plenty, with gold, tobacco, metal alloys, cotton, and sugar as export. Fuels and petroleum products, electricity, machinery and transport equipment, food, and other manufactured still remains the main import. The possible lifting of sanctions should ease earning and lead to payment of debt. The future can be better, but more needs to be done internally and much more externally to aid this southern African nation.
Wow. Such a powerhouse there, Zimbabwe. I mean, from 11th to 15th century, Zimbabwe was a mercantile powerhouse, a major exporter of so many natural resources. We're still celebrating Zimbabwe at 42, and we have our guests with us, as earlier introduced, Pilot Dube and Prosper Chitambara. Once again, welcome to the special broadcast. Now, let's look at over the years. I'll start with you, Prosper Chitambara. As I said earlier on, Zimbabwe was referred to as the jewel of Africa. And then we had independence, which was supposed to live on the gains of independence and democracy, bringing about the Prime Minister, Robert Mugabe, and also the President, Robert Mugabe. Now, let's look at the tenure of Robert Mugabe. From where we are now to where we were before in Zimbabwe, would you say that Zimbabwe has grown, or would you say the economic rate in Zimbabwe has declined?
Thank you so much. So yes, I would say the economic growth rate has actually declined in real terms. So in 1980, we inherited a fairly robust, highly industrialized economy. Even when you look at the currency in 1980, it was even stronger than the local currency, that is the Zim dollar at independence was even stronger than the US dollar. We had a fairly highly industrialized economy, but of course over time the economy has actually weakened on account of a number of factors. But of course I would say the key turning point was 1997, when we saw the local currency actually depreciating quite significantly by almost 60%. To the US dollar, after the government had agreed to compensate the war veterans of the liberation struggle. So that really was unbudgeted for, and it affected the fiscal situation. It affected the macroeconomy. It resulted in Zimbabwe, in the country, having to borrow money, having to print money. And of course, that was also exacerbated in 1998 by the war in the DRC. Again, that was unbudgeted for. Then, of course, the land reform program started off at the beginning of the 2000s. And again, that affected commercial agriculture. That resulted in agricultural production actually slumping quite significantly, and also agriculture productivity. And of course, the agricultural sector was, and it still remains, the mainstay of our economy. And any challenges to that sector obviously have a domino effect on the rest of the economy and on the rest of the other sectors like manufacturing and even the services. So I think a number of those factors, and of course sanctions, they also were imposed in 2002. Initially, they targeted at a few individuals and a few businesses that are aligned with the government. But I would say right now, we when we look at the poverty levels, when we look at the inequality numbers, currently, according to the World Bank, about 49% of Zimbabweans are actually living in extreme poverty. In other words, their incomes, their daily incomes, are below $1.90, or they are earning incomes that are below the local food poverty line. So there are a lot of challenges that we need to address. The high levels of informality. Most Zimbabweans are actually employed in the informal economy. About 75.6% of total employment is informal. And according to the International Monetary Fund, the informal economy contributes as much as 60% to gross domestic product. So Zimbabwe is one of the highest levels of informality across the world. And obviously that affects the capacity of the economy to mobilize resources domestically. And it also affects or limits rather the effectiveness of macroeconomic policies and other development plans and strategies of the government. Investment levels, foreign direct investment levels remain subdued. The doing business environment remains very, very challenging. Currently, we our annual inflation rate, as at March 2022, is about 72.7%, which is the second highest on the African continent and the third highest in the world. So high inflation is discouraged, not just foreign investments, but also local investments. So I think there are a lot of challenges, institutional challenges as well, associated with corruption. I think a number of those factors have really adversely affected the economy, and ultimately they've affected the livelihoods of the ordinary citizens. The economy, even during those years that the economy has actually grown, that growth has not been inclusive. That growth has not uplifted many Zimbabweans from poverty. So I think those are some of the challenges that have contributed to the state of the economy being where it is currently.
Now, Prosper, we do know how the global economy works. The Zimbabwean economy suffers shocks as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. There's a high rate of commodity. There's a hike in commodity prices as a result of the current Russia-Ukraine war. We know that a few years ago, the leadership changed hands, but President Emmerson Mnangagwa, as a lifetime member of the ZANU-PF ruling party, how different are his economic policies from that of his predecessor, Robert Mugabe? And do you see Zimbabwe achieving growth in the nearest future and righting the wrongs of the past with regards to the economy?
I would say the major difference probably is the fact that the current leadership has tried to re-engage with the international community. Of course, they've also introduced the mantra that Zimbabwe is open for business. And yes, we've seen some reforms, but I would think the pace, especially of the institutional reforms, the anti-corruption reforms, and also the political reforms to ensure there is greater harmony, political harmony, greater political consensus, and greater unity. I think the pace has been rather slow. I would say Zimbabweans are a highly politically divided society, and obviously there's need for some kind of political reforms to bring together Zimbabweans from across the political divide and probably come up with a consensus and a national vision that is actually shared by all Zimbabweans. So yes, we've seen the new leadership trying to introduce some reforms to open up the economy, improve the doing business environment. But obviously, it's not something that can be done overnight, because when you look at the extent of the challenges, for example, we did an estimate of the financing requirement, the total financing requirement for the country per annum, and we actually came up with a figure of close to about 5 billion. So every year we need to be investing at least 5 billion in the critical sectors of the economy, like infrastructure, hard infrastructure, and also obviously soft infrastructure like healthcare, social protection, and education. So for a long time, our economy has not experienced meaningful investments in critical sectors of the economy that enhance productivity and that actually help to reduce poverty. So we're actually suffering as a result of that gross underinvestments by both government and the private sector in those critical sectors. So of course, the Open for Business mantra aims at crowding in the private sector in an effort to fill up that huge financing gap that we actually have. But progress has been rather slow, in my view. And of course, progress has also been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and of course the crisis in Ukraine. But we are hopeful that given probably greater unity, political unity, given more expeditious implementation of institutional reforms to bring back, to engender greater confidence in the economy, given a faster pace in terms of the implementation of the ease of doing business. I believe that could actually help to enhance greater investor confidence by not just foreign investors, but also even by the local investors. So yes, there has been a slight improvement, but I think there are still a lot of challenges that need to be dealt with. Yeah.
Now, looking at the slight improvements from 2009 to 2013, when we had the government of national unity, there was a bit of high rate according to the national market there. What exactly do you think accounted for this rebound, especially in the Zimbabwe economy?
Well, so we experienced rebounds at different times over the past few years. The initial rebound was when we had the government of national unity in 2009, and of course we also dollarized. So between about 2000 and 2008, the Zimbabwean economy had experienced hyperinflation. So in 2009, when we had the government of national unity, we actually abandoned the use of the local currency and we introduced the multi-currency regime. So that actually had a very positive impact in terms of bringing macroeconomic stability into the economy. And obviously that helped the economy to actually grow. So in 2011, for example, our economy grew by as much as 18%. 2010, again, there was a massive economic rebound. But at the end of the inclusive government in 2013, from 2013, actually, the economy started again to slow down because of a number of factors. The government, in 2016, government reintroduced the local currency, and obviously high money supply growth then resulted in inflationary pressures actually being generated within the economy, and that affected investments, that affected the economy. So from 2016 to around 2019, the economy was actually in a recession, if you want. And then, of course, in 2020, again, the economy was in decline. But 2021, last year, the economy actually grew quite significantly by almost about 8%. But again, that growth, my view is that it's not really having a tangible impact in terms of the livelihoods of the ordinary citizens, because the number of poor Zimbabweans is actually increasing in spite of that growth. And also, we are not seeing the creation of employment opportunities. So I think that's really the major challenge. That growth is, even in the past, like I said, the growth has not been associated with poverty reduction and also the creation of employment opportunities for the ordinary citizen.
Okay.
Now, Prosper, in different times in Zimbabwe, the economy has suffered distress and stagnation, undergoing periods of hyperinflation, and the government has attributed this to the sanctions regime, and its allies will say the same. And this rapid economic decline has driven majority of Zimbabweans into abysmal poverty, high cost of living, and a lot of unemployment. So what is to blame for this? How big are the effects of sanctions on the Zimbabwean economy, or is it just poor governance?
So I would say it's a combination of both in our own internal factors, our own acts of omission and commission in terms of poor stewardship and management of our abundant resources, but obviously also the external factors. The sanctions have had an impact. Because what sanctions then do is that they increase the country risk factor. They increase the investment premium associated with doing business in Zimbabwe. What sanctions do is that they close out Zimbabwe from the global or from the international financial markets. Like currently, for a Zimbabwean business to borrow offshore, it means they borrow at very, very high interest rates because of this political risk factor or the country risk premium that has been brought about by sanctions. Also, Zimbabwe, of course, we've not been able to service our debts with the World Bank. So we have not been able to actually get financial support from the World Bank and the IMF. But also the sanctions actually indicate that the American directors on the boards of the IMF and the World Bank would actually veto any financial assistance or any loans to Zimbabwe. So they've had a negative impact, an adverse impact. But I would say, I think we also need to consider our own internal factors, a lot of mismanagement. We have allowed, for example, political convenience to override economic rationale in some of the policies that we have implemented over the past few years, like even the compensation of war veterans. We actually used about close to $500 million just to compensate war veterans. And of course, that was done as a way of the government to ingratiate itself with the war veterans, because government was losing support during that time because of the worsening economic situation. So government, in an effort to pacify the war veterans, they decided to compensate them. And of course, also the war in the DRC did not benefit the country in any way. And of course, again, the haphazard land reform program decimated commercial agriculture. So a lot of the decisions that the politicians have actually made over the past years have contributed to a great extent to the state of the economy currently.
All right, thank you so much, Prosper. We have joined us in live Pilot Dube, Finance and Economics Advisor, Democratic Party Zimbabwe. Thank you once again for joining us on this special broadcast. Now, Prosper highlighted sanctions, bad governance as some of the factors that has necessitated Zimbabwe to declining from the economic growth. And now we see low employment opportunities in Zimbabwe. Now, first of all, do you think these are some of the factors that has led to decline in the economy in Zimbabwe? And I also want you to react to especially the issues of migrants. We see a lot of anti-migrant protests going on in South Africa, and especially we also saw a Zimbabwean being killed. Now, what has been the government's response to this anti-migrant protest in South Africa?
Thank you very much. Okay, the issue of anti-migrant that is being experienced by our neighbors is actually a message to the neighbors that go home and sort your problems, because belief is that our economic problems are simply many-made. There's no reason why Zimbabwe is currently in such a basket state. It's absolutely human-made and sometimes deliberate political patronage of ZANU-PF. So to answer your question in brief, that there is a perception that the Zimbabweans must go home and sort their own problems, because the problems are many-made. That's what I would just say.
So do you
believe being punished for deliberately destroying our own economy? Or, for example, just getting before independence, our economy was most vibrant, if not in the whole world. But just after 42 years of independence, it was destroyed to nothing, actually a basket case. So we are responsible for our own mess.
Okay, thank you very much, Pilot. Now, back to you, Prosper. No one wants to invest in a country that is corrupt, where corruption is growing out of control. In a special expose, South Africa's Daily Maverick published a report titled Cartel Power Dynamics in Zimbabwe, where he highlighted how an elite network persists and thrives in Zimbabwe while the economy remains on a downward trajectory. How big of a problem is corruption in Zimbabwe, and what are its effects on the economy?
So it's really a big problem. And of course, it's not just prevalent in the public sector, but also even in the private sector. It's become a way of life for the ordinary citizen. And according to the central bank, we are losing, for example, as much as $3 billion every year through leakages, through the smuggling of minerals. And we also did a study a few years back, which actually revealed that corruption imposes a 20% premium on doing business. So corruption has also contributed to the high inflation, and obviously corruption is discouraged foreign direct investment. Yes, we've seen a lot of inquiries from foreign investors wanting to invest in Zimbabwe, but because of corruption, of course, also because of the very challenging doing business environment. When you look at the World Bank ease of doing business reports, Zimbabwe hasn't been doing very, very well. There are so many encumbrances.
But the government, sorry to interrupt you, Prosper, but the government keeps banding this Zimbabwe is open for business mantra without doing much on its ease of doing business mantra. What is lacking in that regard? What does the government need to do to make the environment more favorable for foreign investment?
I think there are a number of factors really that are lacking that need to be addressed. One key factor, obviously, is the tax regime. Zimbabwe is one of the most heavily taxed economy in the world. I'll give you the example of fuel, for example. When you look at the price of fuel in Zimbabwe, currently we're number one in Africa. And about 40% of the total price of fuel are levies, duties, and other taxes. So I think one way of enhancing the doing business environment or simplifying the doing business environment could be by just simplifying the tax code, by reducing the so many and even eliminating the so many different taxes, levies, and other duties that we actually impose across the length and the breadth of our economy. Another important factor is the issue of the digital economy. I think we have not fully embraced the digital economy. For example, in terms of simple things like registering a business. So currently, it takes on average about 30 days to get a business license. Now, other countries in the region, Zambia takes about 9 days, 7 days. Mozambique, about 5-6 days.
Rwanda, about 48 hours.
Yes, exactly. So we have not really fully embraced the digital economy to facilitate the ease of doing business reform agenda within the country. So there are a number of factors that will need to be sorted out. Of course, institutional reforms also relating to parastatals and other state-owned enterprises. We haven't moved with much speed again in that regard, yet the country is losing a lot of resources through corruption that is actually being perpetrated at these parastatals and other state-owned enterprises. So I would say, I think the bulk of the reforms that we would need to implement to improve our investment readiness and to incentivize investments really center around institutional reforms, because institutions become very, very critical, whether they are the doing business institutions, whether they are the public sector institutions that then also help to complement even the private sector investments that we are actually yearning for.
All right, Prosper, still looking at the recovery path to Zimbabwe. I know agriculture and the mining sector is one of Zimbabwe's major revenue, and before Zimbabwe was a major exporter. But now, according to statistics, we see Zimbabwe being on the list of the major importers. What do you think can improve the agriculture and mining sector in Zimbabwe?
So for agriculture, I think what we need to do, obviously, is we need to invest, especially in irrigation infrastructure. Because for the past few years, we've been affected by climate change. And out of the total land that we can potentially irrigate, we are currently irrigating only about 10% of the total irrigable land. So we need to strengthen our irrigation infrastructure in agriculture. We also need to give farmers title deeds, because that will be critical in terms of unlocking greater private sector financing within the agricultural sector. Currently, government is doing most of the financing, and that's not sustainable. So we need the private sector to come in. But for the private sector to come in, we then need to strengthen land tenure within the country in general. So I think for me, those two factors, if we get them right, if we're able to irrigate as much land as possible, improve that 10%, probably to about 50%, then we give individual farmers title to their land. I think that could actually spell an agricultural revolution in Zimbabwe. Actually, we even did it in the early 80s. In the early 80s, we had the mini agricultural revolution just on the back of infrastructure investments in agriculture, extending agricultural extension support to our farmers, ensuring they have access to finance. And we saw the impact that it actually had in the early 80s in terms of enhancing agricultural output and also enhancing agricultural productivity.
Now, looking at Zimbabwe's relations with the West, it's kind of frosty. The United Kingdom has said, look, our sanctions were on Mugabe's government, individuals and its defense industry, and not, it doesn't really play a part in the economy. And I mean, Zimbabwe is shopping for new friends elsewhere. What's the relationship, the bilateral relationship between Zimbabwe and China? We've seen China as one. My question is directed to Pilot. We've seen China as one of, I mean, Zimbabwe's biggest foreign investor. How is that going, and how can Zimbabwe make it a more mutually beneficial partnership?
Before I would jump to that one, your question, I just also wanted to come back and analyze the reason why Zimbabwe is going towards China. One would dare say the most productive component in Zimbabwe economy or in Zimbabwean government here is corruption. I dare say there's nothing that can come up unless corruption is rooted out. You can invest billions, trillions, anything, but it won't go anywhere because of corruption. If I can just give you a little, the Cisco Steel scandal, there was Air Zimbabwe scandal, Willowgate, Harare City Council, Boca, GMB scandal. So they are all scandals. No matter how much you can pour into this government, nothing will come out. And the way now the move towards China is trying to run away from those people like the Western countries who say, you guys, we have to be accountable. But the Chinese are also in the same basket of corruption. There is nothing that can come out of the Chinese. The Chinese, when they come to business with you, they come with their own labor. So in other words, it's like the Chinese are taking the little China to stay in Zimbabwe. Right now, we have Chinese population coming into Zimbabwe. They discuss removing the culture and the norms of how people operate. So China is just a waste of time as far as I'm concerned. What we need is a cleanup of the political and administration of Zimbabwe. Nothing else will work. You can get billions and billions, and then at the end of the day, without corruption being attended to, it all comes to naught. This is why we now have political agitation that we need to remove. We need to replace this ZANU-PF regime. Nothing else can come out because you have people who are filthy rich. They can't even give a simple scholarship to deserving kids. So what we are saying in Zimbabwe, we are a rich country. All we need is our economic stewards who are serious, who are devoted to resuscitation of our country. And that's all. We have nothing wrong. Everything, we have enough minerals, we have enough knowledge. We are actually exporting the best brains in the world. Like if you go anywhere, all the Zimbabwean professionals are excelling. The only place they cannot excel is in their own country. So our only problem is our corrupt government. That's all.
Okay.
Anything else is just a waste of time.
Thank you, Pilot. Just before we wrap things up, Prosper, today Zimbabwe is 42nd Independence Day, and of course, as a nation, you're hopeful for a better future. Zimbabwe used to be the jewel in Africa, the breadbasket of Africa, the center of art, culture, and trade. What reasons gives you hope for the future? What does Zimbabwe need to do to get back to those lofty days?
Thank you so much. I think the first and foremost important thing that we need to do, obviously, is to ensure there's greater political unity among Zimbabweans. I think, like I said earlier on, one of the biggest challenges that we are having is that we are a highly divided society. Even the political environment is highly toxic, and that's not conducive for sustainable and inclusive economic growth and development. So I've always argued that even before our government re-engages with the international community, I think it's more important to ensure that we re-engage amongst ourselves so at least we can find ourselves and we're actually able to attain some unity, some consensus, and also have a common vision and a common understanding of where we want to take our economy to. So I think for me that's very, very critical. Otherwise, everything else will not succeed. And also, again, the anti-corruption reform agenda, I think it's something that we need to expedite. And of course, it's also closely related to institutional reforms around the issues of property rights, around state-owned enterprises and other parastatals. So I think that's also very, very critical, because as long as we are losing a lot of resources through corruption, it will be difficult to mobilize resources domestically to invest in critical sectors of the economy that can enhance productivity and that can also have a big impact in terms of the very, very high levels of poverty that we actually have in the country, of close to about 50% of all the Zimbabweans actually being extremely poor. So if you can have a combination of that political consensus, so a social contract really that binds all Zimbabweans together to a common development vision and understanding, I think that can also be a launch pad to then implement the other requisite institutional reforms that are necessary to engender greater confidence within our economy as a basis for ensuring there's sustainable and inclusive growth and development.
All right, thank you so much, Prosper. Corruption needs to be nipped in the bud for Zimbabwe to see more of economic recovery. Thank you so much, Prosper Chitambara, Development Economist, and Pilot Dube, Finance and Economics Advisor, Democratic Party Zimbabwe, who joined us to discuss the economy of Zimbabwe and way forward to transforming Zimbabwe. Thank you so much for joining us.